So, I want you to imagine for a second that every single thing you've ever read in a history book,
Okay.
like every rise and fall of an empire, every global war, political assassinations, the shifting of national borders,
And the big stuff, yeah.
right, all the big historical stuff. Imagine that all of it is actually just the secondary fallout of a completely different conflict.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. A massive, unseen, multidimensional war that was actually declared before the first human being even took a breath.
That's heavy.
It is, because, we look at the timeline of human history and we tend to view it like a closed terrarium.
Right.
We point to visible human causes. We say, this nation invaded because they needed resources. Or, that dictator was driven by pure ego.
It's a very clean, visible terrestrial equation. We like that.
Exactly. We love the clean equation.
We do, because it's comforting to view history that way.
Yeah.
I mean, the human mind naturally prefers a closed system.
Yeah.
A system where we are the sole authors of our own story, where all the variables can be, quantified and categorized. But the framework we're examining today, it radically disrupts that comfort.
It really dinks. So, welcome to another deep dive.
No.
Today, we are looking at this towering stack of theological essays, linguistic analyses, and scriptural commentaries that all point toward this comprehensive theological framework.
Known as the cosmic conflict.
The cosmic conflict, right. And our mission today is to stitch together these seemingly disparate fragments from all across the biblical text.
Starting from the very beginning.
Literally the opening lines of Genesis, stretching all the way to the apocalyptic visions of Revelation. We're going to outline a cohesive theory that attempts to explain, well, the primordial origins of evil.
And the incredibly chaotic state of the early earth, which is fascinating.
Super fascinating. Plus the unseen spiritual battles that these sources argue are currently, like right now, dictating the human experience.
But to do this properly, we really need to establish some ground rules for you listening right now.
Yeah, good point. Lay it out.
So the materials we are unpacking today present a specific theological theory. It's a lens through which a vast array of ancient texts are connected.
Right.
Our objective here is not to endorse a specific religious dogma or, advocate for any particular denomination's political or theological stance.
We're not picking sides.
Exactly. We are just going to impartially analyze the architecture of this idea. We want to understand the profound what and the mechanical why behind this ancient framework.
Right. Examining how these concepts interact with history and psychology and human agency.
Yes.
So, okay, let's unpack this, because to understand the beginning of this theory, we actually have to start at the end of the biblical timeline.
Which sounds counterintuitive, but it's necessary.
It is. The anchor point for this entire framework is Revelation chapter 12, specifically verses 7 through 12.
Right.
This is the definitive, unambiguous textual claim that introduces a concept that most people find completely jarring, which is, quote, there was war in heaven.
Yeah, Revelation 12 really operates as the Rosetta Stone for the cosmic conflict theory.
The Rosetta Stone.
Exactly. The text paints an incredibly vivid and violent picture. It states, and there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels.
Which is just wild imagery.
It is. And it continues by detailing that this dragon, explicitly identified in the text as the devil and Satan, was utterly defeated and hurled down to the earth, along with his entire faction of rebellious angels.
And the phrase war in heaven just forces a complete mental reboot, doesn't it?
It shatters the paradigm.
Completely. Because if you grew up with the cultural caricature of heaven, you picture eternal tranquility.
Clouds, harp music, babies with wings.
Right. Absolute peace. But John the Revelator introduces a literal celestial mismatch here. You have Michael, the archangel, commanding an angelic military force.
The literal army.
Yeah, an army going head-to-head in a cosmic theater against a dragon and its forces. It totally shatters the idea of a passive spiritual realm.
It does. And, the apocalyptic genre of Revelation relies heavily on symbolic imagery, obviously.
Yeah.
But theologians who subscribe to the cosmic conflict framework, they argue that this specific passage is not merely a metaphor for, future human political struggles.
Okay, so what is it then?
They read this as a flashback.
A flashback? Wow.
Yeah. While John is receiving a vision of the end of the age, the narrative structure pulls the curtain back on the inciting incident of the entire universe.
It's looking back to the primordial origin of evil.
Exactly. It establishes that the spiritual realm contains a highly structured hierarchy of beings, and it marks a definitive transition point where a rebellion occurred and the Adiphary's access was permanently restricted.
Okay, so if we're looking at the inciting incident of a universal war, the immediate question I have is, well, who instigated the coup and what was the motive?
Right, you need a suspect profile.
Yes, and to find that suspect profile, the sources take us out of the apocalyptic literature of the New Testament and pull us deep into the prophetic books of the Old Testament.
Specifically, we're looking at Isaiah chapter 14 and Ezekiel chapter 28.
Those two chapters are they're the foundational texts for understanding the anatomy of the adversary here.
They are. But to read them properly within this framework, scholars utilize a literary principle called double reference.
Okay, yeah. Let's define double reference for anyone unfamiliar with the term, because it sounds almost like a literary ventriloquist act.
That's actually a great way to put it.
Right. Like you're addressing the human king who is physically sitting on the throne.
Right.
But the language transcends human capability.
Right.
Meaning the prophet is actually taking aim at the invisible spiritual entity standing right behind him, pulling the strings. Is that a fair assessment?
That perfectly captures the mechanism, yeah. On the surface, the prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel are delivering these blistering political laments or taunts against the earthly kings of Babylon and Tyre, respectively.
Right, and these were actual historical, geographical enemies of ancient Israel.
Exactly. But as you read the text, the descriptions rapidly break the bounds of human reality.
They get super weird.
They do. The earthly kings serve as a type, or a localized shadow, of the ultimate spiritual power operating behind their empires.
The actual instigator of the cosmic war?
Right, whom Latin translations of Isaiah eventually named Lucifer, the light bringer or morning star.
And the language in Ezekiel 28 is truly wild when you read it with that double reference lens.
Oh, it's stunning.
The prophet says, "You are the signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. You were an anointed guardian cherub."
Yeah.
I mean, a human politician sitting in the coastal trading city of Tyre was certainly not wandering around the Garden of Eden covered in flawless jewels.
Definitely not. The text goes to great lengths to describe a being of unparalleled created majesty.
Yeah.
This entity is described as functioning in the absolute highest echelons of the divine presence. And that term you mentioned, anointed guardian cherub, is critical here.
Because a cherub isn't what we think it is, right?
Right. In ancient Near Eastern literature and biblical theology, a cherub is not a plump baby with little wings.
Not the Valentine's Day Cupid.
Exactly. A cherub is a terrifying sphinx-like creature. It's a fiercely powerful throne guardian.
Wow.
This being was stationed at the very center of divine authority. And Ezekiel explicitly notes that this being was perfect in all his ways from the day he was created until
iniquity was found in you.
That's the turning point.
That is the hinge upon which the entire universe turns. And if Ezekiel tells us about the physical, or rather spiritual perfection of this being, Isaiah 14 gives us the actual autopsy of that iniquity.
It outlines what theologians often call the 5 I wills.
The 5 I wills.
That's
because
right.
It wasn't that this cherub suddenly forged a sword and started a physical riot, right? The text describes an internal intellectual insurrection.
Right. The anatomy of the rebellion is entirely rooted in cosmic pride, birthed in the mind.
Yeah.
Isaiah records these 5 internal declarations. He says, "I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High."
Wow. Notice the progression of those statements?
It's very systematic.
It's a calculated ascent of ambition. It reads like the ultimate corporate hostile takeover, but initiated by a trusted insider.
Yes.
It's the equivalent of a flawlessly programmed, incredibly advanced AI deciding that its own processing power and brilliance mean it shouldn't be constrained by the parameters of its creator anymore.
Right. It decides to rewrite its own source code to become the user rather than the program.
Exactly. And according to the framework, this rogue intelligence is highly persuasive. Revelation implies that 1/3 of the entire angelic host joined this ideological coup.
A massive defection.
It's huge. But this brings up a massive philosophical wall that always just breaks my brain.
I think I know where you're going with this. The origin of the rebellion itself.
Yes. Right. If this guardian cherub was created perfectly, placed in a completely perfect environment, and existed in the presence of a perfect creator.
How does the thought of rebellion even generate?
Exactly. There is no external temptation. There's no pre-existing sin to influence him. Does this framework view this as a flaw in the design? Like, is this the original glitch in the system of free will?
You are identifying what is arguably the most profound and challenging mystery in all of theology, the theodicy of free will.
It's a tough one.
It really is. The sources we're examining suggest that this was absolutely not a glitch or a design flaw.
Okay, so what is it?
Rather, it is the terrifying inherent risk required for genuine autonomy. The theological argument posits that for love, worship, and obedience to hold any actual value, the capacity to choose against the Creator must authentically exist.
Because if the angels were simply programmed to obey, they would just be automatons.
Exactly.
So perfection requires the option of imperfection.
Within this framework, yes, the being's perfection included absolute free will. The texts suggest that this entity became enamored with his own reflection.
Okay.
Remember, Ezekiel points out his beauty and wisdom. He stopped looking outward at the infinite creator and began looking inward at his own finite, albeit staggering majesty.
So the inception of evil wasn't the creation of a new dark substance.
No, it was the twisting of something good. It was the choice of the self over the source. And the moment that internal choice was formalized into those I will statements, the harmony of the universe was fractured.
Wow. And what the sources make very clear is that this wasn't just a localized heavenly HR dispute that resulted in a celestial demotion, right?
Or at all.
The fallout was catastrophic. And it brings us to a transition that literally changes how you read the very first page of the Bible.
We're moving from the spiritual inciting incident to the physical collateral damage.
Right.
The framework argues that the war in heaven had immediate, devastating consequences for the material universe, which introduces us to the profound mystery of Genesis.
Yeah, let's look at Genesis 1. The opening sentence is arguably the most famous string of words ever written, right? In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Genesis 1, verse 1.
A masterful, complete statement of origins.
It implies perfection and order, but then you take a single breath, you read the very next sentence, Genesis 1, verse 2, and the entire vibe completely degrades.
It falls off a cliff.
It really does. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep.
It is an incredibly jarring transition. You move instantaneously from the majestic declaration of creation to a dark, chaotic, watery wasteland.
So how do the sources explain that whiplash?
To explain it, they introduce a concept known as the gap theory, or the ruin restitution theory.
The gap theory.
Yeah. This theological framework proposes that there is an indeterminate, potentially vast chronological chasm sitting right there in the white space between verse 1 and verse 2.
A gap that could encapsulate millions or even billions of years of geological and cosmic history.
The theory allows for exactly that.
Yeah.
The premise is that Genesis 1, verse 1 describes the original, pristine creation of the cosmos. Then, within that unrecorded gap between the verses, the cosmic conflict we just discussed takes place.
The war in heaven.
Right. The guardian cherub rebels, the war occurs, and the rebel faction is cast down. The theory posits that this cataclysmic spiritual judgment physically ruins the original creation.
Okay, so by the time the narrative picks back up in verse 2, we're not looking at a blank canvas awaiting paint.
No, we are looking at a devastated crime scene.
A crime scene. Man, let's dig into the linguistics here, because the authors of these sources, they don't just rely on intuition for this, right? They lean heavily on the original Hebrew syntax to justify this gap.
They do.
The phrase without form and void in English is a translation of the Hebrew phrase tohu wabohu.
Yes, tohu wabohu is a fascinating linguistic pairing. It carries the meaning of waste, emptiness, chaos, and desolation.
Okay.
The proponents of the ruin restitution theory point to a vital cross-reference in the book of Isaiah, specifically Isaiah 45, verse 18.
What does that say?
In that passage, the prophet explicitly states that God did not create the earth tohu. He did not create it in vain or as a chaotic wasteland. He formed it to be inhabited.
Okay, that is a massive logical linchpin for this theory.
Right.
Because if the prophet states categorically that God did not originally create the earth as a tohu wasteland, but Genesis 1, verse 2 clearly states that the earth is a tohu wasteland, then something catastrophic must have occurred between the original creation and the state of ruin.
Exactly. The logical deduction is that the earth underwent a massive degradation.
Wow.
Furthermore, the grammatical argument centers on the Hebrew verb haya, which English Bibles typically translate as was in the phrase, the earth was without form.
Right.
Many Hebrew scholars and proponents of this theory note that Hayek can legitimately, and perhaps more accurately in context of change, be translated as became.
Became.
So the text would read, the earth became without form and void. It implies a change of state, a descent from order into chaos.
It became ruined. And the imagery of verse 2 adds another layer of evidence, right? Darkness was upon the face of the deep.
Yeah.
Because if we look at biblical symbolism from front to back, the Creator is constantly associated with light. God is light, and in him is no darkness at all.
Very true.
So if you have a planet covered in pitch black darkness and chaotic, raging waters, the deep, or Tehom in Hebrew, which ancient cultures viewed as the ultimate symbol of untamed chaos, that darkness isn't just an absence of photons.
No, it is a theological signature.
A theological signature. I like that.
It is the fingerprint of divine judgment. The physical chaos is the visible fallout of the invisible spiritual war.
Okay.
If we follow the trajectory of this framework, it profoundly alters how we understand the famous 6 days of creation that follow in Genesis 1.
How so?
When the narrative describes God saying, "Let there be light," separating the waters and causing dry land to appear, this is not an original creation ex nihilo, meaning out of nothing.
Oh, I see. It's a divine rehabilitation project. Yeah.
Yes. It is the reordering and restitution of a war-torn, ruined biosphere.
It makes me think of buying a piece of real estate.
Okay, how so?
Well, Genesis 1, verse 1 is the master architect building a pristine, beautiful mansion on a flawless plot of land.
Right.
But then a massive fire breaks out, like arson really committed by a rogue tenant.
The adversary.
Right. So when the narrative resumes in Genesis 1, verse 2, you aren't looking at an empty dirt lot ready for a foundation. You're looking at a smoking, waterlogged, demolished ruin.
That's a great visual.
And the subsequent 6 days are the divine renovation crew coming in to clear the debris, push back the floodwaters, turn the lights back on, and rebuild the habitat.
The renovation analogy is highly accurate to how gap theorists read the text.
Yeah.
But we must acknowledge the tension this theory creates, particularly in modern theological and scientific dialogues.
Right, because if you're listening to this and trying to square the Genesis account with everything you learned in high school geology, this gap theory seems like the exact hinge point where those two worlds could theoretically collide.
It's exactly.
The obvious pushback is, is this gap theory just a clever, convenient concordism? Meaning, is it just theologians attempting a sleight of hand to fit prehistoric geological eras, dinosaurs, and billions of years of fossil records into a literal biblical timeline just to avoid looking unscientific?
That is the big critique.
Right. Or is the linguistic evidence of ruin genuinely that strong on its own merits?
The sources are very transparent about that critique. There's no denying that the gap theory gained massive popularity in the 19th and early 20th centuries.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was championed by figures like Thomas Chalmers and popularized by the Schofield Reference Bible, precisely because it offered a way to harmonize the emerging discoveries of deep geological time with the scriptural text.
Okay, that makes sense.
However, the scholars defending the framework argue that reducing it to mere scientific accommodation ignores its primary value. It serves as a profound theodicy. It answers the agonizing question of why a perfectly good God's creation contains darkness, chaos, and death before humanity even enters the narrative.
Ah, I see.
It provides a theological explanation for the existence of a hostile spiritual force in a world God authored.
And if you accept the premise of this theory that the Earth was ruined by cosmic judgment and subsequently restored, it immediately forces a question that sounds like it belongs in a science fiction novel.
Okay, what's that?
If the Earth was a functional habitation before the ruin of verse 2, who or what was living in that pre-Adamic world?
Oh, right.
Who was living in the house before the arsonist burned it down?
This brings us to one of the most speculative yet textually fascinating extrapolations in the sources.
Yeah.
The echoes of a lost world.
Yes.
And the entire concept pivots on a single command given to the newly created humans.
Right. We're looking at Genesis 1, verse 28, often referred to as the cultural mandate. The divine renovation is complete, the lights are on, the animals are placed, and God creates Adam and Eve. He blesses them and gives them their operational directive. In the classic 1611 King James Version, the text reads, quote, "Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth."
And the word replenish is the absolute focal point there.
Replenish, the prefix re is undeniable in English. It implies repetition.
Exactly. If I ask you to refill your coffee cup, it implies a sequence of events. The cup was originally full, it was somehow emptied or consumed, and now I'm instructing you to restore it to its former state.
Right.
If humanity is commanded to replenish the earth, it carries the massive implication that the earth was fully populated prior to their arrival.
It's a tantalizing linguistic clue that proponents of the pre-Adamic world lean on heavily. But to maintain our impartial analysis, we have to present the counter-argument the linguists offer here.
Fair enough. When the King James Version was translated in the early 17th century, the English word replenish did not strictly carry the prefix meaning of doing it again.
Oh, it didn't?
No. It was often used synonymously with to fill completely or to stock. Furthermore, the original Hebrew word used in the text is mele, which simply translates as to fill.
Just to fill.
Yes. This is why virtually all modern English translations render the phrase simply as fill the earth.
Okay, I hear the linguistic technicality, but the framework doesn't just abandon the point there, right? Because the broader context of Genesis provides a massive structural parallel that reignites the argument.
Precisely. Gap theorists point to an undeniable echo later in the text.
Let's hear it.
In Genesis 9, verse 1, immediately following the global judgment of the flood, God blesses Noah and his sons and gives them an operational directive. He uses the exact same Hebrew phrase, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth.
Wow. And in the context of Noah, there is zero ambiguity there.
None at all.
It is 100% a command to repopulate a devastated, geographically ruined world that was just wiped out by a watery judgment.
Exactly.
The earth was full, it was emptied by divine decree, and Noah is told to fill it back up.
The parallel is structurally striking. If the identical command given to Noah explicitly means refill what was just emptied by judgment, theologians argue it carries the exact same historical weight when spoken to Adam.
It implicitly acknowledges that Adam is stepping onto a stage that has already seen a previous act.
Which opens the door to incredible speculation.
Seriously, incredible speculation. Like, if the earth was populated before Adam, who was here, was it an angelic civilization? Was there some kind of pre-Adamic sentient order that operated under the dominion of the guardian cherub before his intellectual coup?
The framework suggests exactly that kind of extrapolation.
It does.
Yeah. If Lucifer was the anointed cherub, whose administrative domain included the physical cosmos, his rebellion would have brought divine judgment upon whatever civilization, ecosystem, or order existed under his rule.
Wow.
So when the Creator fashions Adam and Eve from the dust of this newly restored planet, they are not just innocent gardeners placed in a pristine, untested terrarium.
They are vice guardians.
Yes.
They are a brand new physical management team brought in to replace the corrupted spiritual management. It entirely reframes the story of Eden.
It really does.
It's like humanity was parachuted behind enemy lines into a recently reclaimed, highly contested territory. God tells them to subdue the earth. You don't need to subdue something unless there is an inherent potential for resistance or a hostile element present.
That is a critical insight into human purpose within this framework. Adam and Eve were image bearers tasked with actively stewarding a contested world back to the Creator's order.
Okay.
They represented a new physical administration establishing a beachhead on a planet that was previously the domain of the adversary.
Which makes the events of Genesis 3 make so much more tactical sense.
Oh, absolutely.
If you ever wondered why a talking serpent was waiting in the grass so shortly after humanity was created, it wasn't a random wildlife encounter.
No, it was targeted.
It was a targeted, strategic assassination of the new management team.
The temptation in Eden was a calculated counterattack. The adversary, having been cast down and restricted, could no longer strike directly at the throne of the Creator.
Right.
So he executed a proxy war. He struck at the creatures made in the Creator's image, the very beings who had been handed the dominion over his former territory.
Wow.
The goal was to corrupt the new administration and trick them into legally surrendering the deed to the earth back to him.
The ultimate sabotage. If I can't rule this sphere, I will ensure the new tenants rebel just like I did and forfeit their authority.
And tragically, the counterattack succeeds.
Right. Humanity's choice to align with the serpent's logic in Genesis 3 essentially hands the keys of earthly dominion back to the adversary.
The fall of humanity allowed the cosmic war to deeply infect the human timeline.
So it wasn't just a localized event.
Not at all. The spiritual conflict became inextricably woven into human history, which leads us to the next phase of the theory, understanding how this invisible ancient war shapes the very visible physical nations and geopolitics of our world today.
Okay, yeah, because if the earthly domain was surrendered in Eden, how does that cosmic loss actually physically manifest in the rise and fall of human empires?
It's a great question.
Because when we watch the news or read history, we feel this.
Yeah.
There's a chaotic, almost maddening undercurrent to human conflict that often feels like it goes beyond just rational arguments over borders or resources or political ideologies.
The sources address this by drawing on the prophetic warnings of Jesus in the New Testament, specifically in Matthew 24.
What does he say?
Christ speaks to his disciples about the trajectory of human history, warning that there will be wars and rumors of wars, and that nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom.
Right.
Within the cosmic conflict framework, this is not merely a sociological observation about humanity's tendency toward violence.
It's describing a mechanism.
Yes. These physical kinetic wars, the clashing of swords, the firing of artillery, are described as the shadow play.
A shadow play.
Yeah. They are the visible earthly symptoms of a massive subterranean tectonic shift in the spiritual realm.
Okay, let me make sure I'm tracking.
Go ahead.
When human kingdoms violently collide, the text suggests it is often the earthly manifestation of unseen spiritual kingdoms violently colliding above them.
Exactly.
And to really grasp the architecture of how the world got divided up into these rival spiritual territories, the sources point us back to the Old Testament, specifically to the events of Genesis 11.
The Tower of Babel.
Yes, Babel.
Babel is the structural blueprint for this geopolitical spiritual warfare.
Walk us through it.
Following the global flood, humanity was explicitly commanded to spread out and fill the earth. Instead, they localized in the plains of Shinar. They attempted to centralize human power, building a ziggurat, a tower reaching to the heavens. It was a unified technological and spiritual rebellion against the divine order. And God's response to this centralization is famous. He confuses their languages and fractures them into diverse nations.
But the framework argues this wasn't just a linguistic division to force them to migrate, right? There is a massive, unseen spiritual assignment that occurs simultaneously.
Drawing heavily on texts like Deuteronomy 32, specifically verses 8 and 9, the theory introduces the concept of the divine council worldview.
The divine council worldview.
Okay. The text suggests that at Babel, the Creator essentially disinherited the rebellious human nations. He allotted the administration of these newly formed nations to lesser spiritual beings.
Often referred to in ancient texts as the sons of God.
Exactly.
So every nation was basically assigned a spiritual governor, but those governors went rogue.
Precisely. The theory posits that these assigned spiritual beings eventually corrupted their mandate. Instead of shepherding the nations toward the ultimate Creator, they accepted the worship of the nations for themselves.
Oh.
They became the corrupt principalities and powers that demand allegiance, blood, and idolatry. Humanity's attempt to build an empire without God resulted in them being handed over to spiritual tyrants.
And to make this abstract concept concrete, to really show what this looks like in operational practice, the sources dedicate significant analysis to one of the most bizarre, fascinating, and honestly terrifying accounts in all of biblical literature.
Daniel chapter 10.
Yes, Daniel chapter 10.
It is arguably the most transparent look at geopolitical spiritual warfare in the entire biblical canon. It pulls the curtain completely back on the mechanics of the unseen realm.
Okay, let's set the scene for the listener because the context really matters here. Daniel is an incredibly old man at this point. He is a prophet living in exile.
Yeah.
He has been mourning and fasting, eating no rich food, drinking no wine for 21 days. He's desperately praying for understanding about the geopolitical future of his people who are caught between empires. Finally, after 3 grueling weeks, a divine messenger appears to him. And the description of this being is terrifying. Eyes like flaming torches, a face like lightning.
Very intimidating.
Daniel literally loses all his strength and collapses face first into the dirt. And when the being finally speaks, he essentially apologizes for being late to the meeting.
It is a staggering narrative detail.
It really is.
The divine messenger explicitly tells Daniel the reason for his delay. He says, "From the first day that you set your heart to understand, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days.
The prince of the kingdom of Persia. I mean, he is absolutely not talking about a human monarch.
Definitely not.
A human guy named Cyrus, or Cambyses, no matter how powerful his army is, cannot intercept a glowing, lightning-faced, multidimensional entity in the sky and put him in a wrestling hold for 3 weeks.
No, the text demands a spiritual interpretation there. This prince is a high-ranking rogue spiritual entity, a territorial spirit. This fallen angel is assigned to govern, manipulate, and influence the geographical region and the vast human empire of Persia.
Wow.
The divine messenger was quite literally locked in cosmic combat in the spiritual atmosphere over the Persian Empire. And the text reveals exactly how that stalemate was finally broken.
Right.
The messenger tells Daniel, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me.
Michael. The exact same Michael we read about in Revelation 12.
The very same.
The archangel who commanded the forces that kicked the dragon out of heaven in the primordial past. He is still on the front lines, fighting the dragon's corrupted generals over the airspace of human empires.
It is the unbroken continuation of the exact same war. Michael, who is designated in the text as the guardian archangel over Israel, has to intervene in this high-level interdimensional dogfight, just so the messenger can break through enemy lines and deliver a message to a human prophet.
That is wild.
And the political scope of this war is emphasized again before the chapter closes. The messenger tells Daniel, now I must return to fight with the prince of Persia, and when I am through with him, behold, the prince of Greece will come.
The Prince of Greece. He is historically predicting the rise of the next global superpower, the empire of Alexander the Great.
Right.
But he is identifying the human empire by the specific spiritual entity that is driving it from the unseen realm.
Yes.
It makes human history look like a massive, multi-tiered chessboard. We study the board and we think we are the grandmasters moving the pieces. We write biographies about how Alexander the Great was a singular genius tactician.
But this framework argues that the board itself is being tilted.
Yes.
The cultural atmosphere is being manipulated, and the geopolitical momentum is being generated by ancient, unseen hands.
But I have to push back here because this interpretation flirts dangerously with fatalism.
Okay, how so?
If high-ranking spiritual princes are pulling the strings of entire empires like Persia and Greece and fighting wars in the atmosphere that dictate the rise and fall of nations, how much agency do humans actually possess in their own history?
That's a fair point.
Are we just biological meat puppets caught in an angelic crossfire?
The sources are very careful to navigate away from sheer determinism. Within the biblical framework, human agency and moral responsibility remain entirely intact. We are not puppets stripped of free will.
Okay, good.
However, that agency is heavily, constantly influenced by the cultural and spiritual atmosphere that these entities engineer.
The atmosphere.
Yes. A territorial principality does not literally possess every individual citizen in a nation. Rather, it shapes the overarching zeitgeist.
I see.
It constructs cultural strongholds of extreme pride or ruthless materialism or bloodthirsty militarism or pervasive lust. It creates a powerful societal current.
Oh, wow.
You possess the free will to swim against that current, but the framework warns that the current is incredibly strong, entirely hostile, and was engineered by an intelligence vastly older and more strategic than human sociology.
So these entities essentially design the menu of ideologies, and we freely, eagerly choose from it, walking away convinced that the toxic ideology we just consumed was our own original, brilliant idea all along.
That is the insidious genius of the strategy, which leads us to the most practical, immediate application of this entire deep dive.
Let's get into it.
This war isn't just happening in the prehistoric past or in the high-altitude airspace above ancient empires or in the closed-door meetings of modern geopolitical powers.
Where is it happening?
It is happening intimately, relentlessly, and quietly inside the human mind.
Because if you're listening to this on your commute or while making breakfast, you might be thinking, okay, cosmic celestial battles, fallen angels wrestling over Persia, deep time gap theories. This is an incredible script for a sci-fi epic, but what does it have to do with the anxiety I feel on a Tuesday morning?
Right. And the Apostle Paul bridges that exact gap.
He does.
He takes the staggering, multidimensional cosmic conflict and makes it brutally, inescapably personal. In Ephesians chapter 6, writing from the confinement of a Roman prison, Paul issues what serves as the ultimate mission briefing for the individual believer.
What does he write?
He writes, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places.
We do not wrestle against flesh and blood. That phrase alone requires a massive paradigm shift.
Absolutely.
It means your micromanaging boss, the opposing political party that enrages you, the neighbor you're feuding with, or even your spouse when you're in a bitter argument. None of them are the actual enemy.
They are absolutely not the enemy. They may be the current battlefield, or they may be heavily influenced by the enemy's atmospheric strategies, but the true combatants are invisible. Paul meticulously uses specific Greek military and political terms to describe the opposition. Archos, meaning rulers. Exousias, authorities. Cosmokratores, world rulers or cosmic powers.
So it's very structured.
Highly structured. This is not a vague, cartoonish concept of bad vibes or negative energy. Paul is describing an entrenched, highly intelligent spiritual insurgency.
Wow.
And because the enemy is inherently spiritual, Paul insists that human, carnal weapons, whether physical violence, political maneuvering, or sheer human willpower, are entirely useless.
Because you cannot shoot a principality with a rifle. You cannot pass legislation to arrest a spiritual power of darkness.
Exactly why Paul introduces the famous metaphor of the armor of God. But to truly understand the mechanics of how that armor functions in reality, the sources require us to layer in another vital text from Paul.
Which one?
2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 through 7. This is the passage that defines exactly where the front lines of this war are actually drawn.
Let me read that section because the language is incredibly aggressive. Paul says, "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ."
The operational phrase there is pulling down strongholds.
Pulling down strongholds.
The original Greek word Paul uses is akiroma. It does not mean a minor bad habit or a fleeting negative mood. An akiroma is a heavily fortified military installation.
Like a fortress.
Yes, it is a castle built on an impenetrable hill designed to hold territory and repel attacks. In the context of spiritual and psychological warfare, these strongholds are entrenched systems of thought. They are false ideologies, deep-seated cultural narratives, inherited generational traumas, and crippling personal fears that have built towering, reinforced walls within a person's cognitive landscape to keep the truth of the Creator out.
This completely reframes the concept of demonic attack.
It does.
Because the cultural portrayal of spiritual warfare is always hyperdramatic, right? Spinning heads, levitating beds, horror movie tropes.
Bollywood version, yeah.
But what Paul is describing is the ultimate psychological Trojan horse. The adversary does not need to physically manifest in your room if he can successfully plant a toxic ideology, a paralyzing depression, an identity-crushing anxiety, or a fundamental lie about your worth deep in your subconscious.
A lie that you eventually defend, protect, and identify as your own original thought.
Wow.
That is the most effective strategy in the entire conflict. The original sin, Lucifer's "I will," his prideful declaration of autonomy, the belief that I do not need the Creator, I can define my own reality, is recycled and weaponized against every single generation of humanity.
It just keeps repeating.
It is repackaged into modern philosophical movements. It is woven into the algorithms of our media. It saturates the spirit of the age. It is the persistent ancient lie that a human being can be the ultimate arbiter of their own truth and exist as their own God without consequence. The enemy targets human autonomy, establishing a heavily defended beachhead in the mind.
Which brings us to the operational mechanics. If the enemy's greatest, most devastating weapon is deception, a fortified lie planted in the neural pathways of the mind, how exactly does the armor of God function to fight an invisible thought?
Good question.
Like, if my specific personal stronghold is a crushing daily anxiety about the future or an absolute addiction to the validation of strangers, how does strapping on a metaphorical breastplate or holding a metaphorical shield actually help me dismantle that cognitive fortress?
The theologians analyzing these texts emphasize that the pieces of the armor are not magical amulets or mystical incantations.
They aren't just symbolic.
No, they are the rigorous, practical application of objective divine truth against subjective deceptive feelings.
Okay, unpack that.
How do you dismantle a cognitive fortress built on layers of lies? You engage the belt of truth. You intentionally, ruthlessly align your personal perception of reality with the Creator's declared reality. How do you fight The relentless internal accusation that you are fundamentally worthless, a failure, and condemned. You put on the breastplate of righteousness. The deeply held conviction that your standing, your worth, and your justification before the Creator are entirely secured by the historical work of Christ, not by your own fluctuating daily performance.
And the shield. Paul talks about the shield of faith extinguishing the flaming darts of the wicked one. Those darts are the sudden intrusive thoughts, right? The spike of panic, the flash of irrational jealousy, the sudden urge of an addiction.
Exactly. And the shield of faith is not a blind, naive optimism. It is a dynamic, active trust in the established character of God.
Okay.
When the dart of panic hits, faith is the mechanism that says, I feel terrified, but I trust the historical track record of the Creator over my current biochemical response. And this defensive posture is paired with the singular offensive weapon in the entire panoply.
The sword of the Spirit, which Paul explicitly identifies as the Word of God.
Yes. You do not defeat a deeply entrenched spiritual lie by debating it using human logic or sheer willpower. You defeat it by speaking a higher objective truth over it. You take the rogue thought captive, as Paul instructs.
You act as a mental border guard.
Exactly.
Interrogating every thought that enters your mind. Like, does this thought align with the nature, character, and teachings of Christ? If it doesn't, you do not entertain it. You execute it with the truth.
You actively, deliberately dismantle the cognitive fortress, brick by brick, through the disciplined application of Scripture.
It is an incredibly empowering, active framework. It means that you, the listener, are not just a passive victim of your own brain chemistry, nor are you just collateral damage in a cultural toxic waste dump.
Yeah.
You are an equipped, active combatant provided with divine ordinance capable of rewiring your own mind.
Which brings this extensive deep dive to its ultimate synthesis. We have traced the architecture of this war from the prehistoric void of Genesis through the rise and fall of geopolitical empires, all the way down to the microscopic synapses of the human brain.
It really is expansive.
It reveals the staggering, multi-front reality of the believer's existence.
As a listener, if you operate within this framework as a believer, you have to recognize that you're navigating a war on three distinct, simultaneous fronts.
Right. Let's list them.
First, you're fighting the enemy inside of you. That is your own fallen human nature, the flesh, those uncaptured thoughts, and the cognitive strongholds we just explored.
Yes.
Second, you're fighting the enemy around you, the cultural systems, the hostile zeitgeist, and the societal structures that are fundamentally opposed to the Creator's design.
Yep.
And third, you're fighting the enemy above you, the principalities, the rogue authorities, and the actual spiritual entities manipulating the unseen atmospheric realm.
All three at once.
And I have to admit, laying it all out like that, it sounds utterly exhausting. It sounds like a recipe for constant paranoia and overwhelming anxiety.
It would absolutely induce paralysis, if not for the ultimate crucial counterbalance that every single source in our stack explicitly emphasizes.
What's the counterbalance?
What's fascinating is that the theologians do not end their analysis on a note of cosmic dread or deterministic despair. The ultimate defining takeaway of this entire theological framework is zero fear.
Zero fear in the face of a multidimensional war.
Exactly that. The sources argue that within this belief system, Satan is not God's equal opposite.
Right.
This is not a dualistic universe where the dark side and the light side are locked in an eternal equal arm wrestling match. The dragon is merely a created being. He is a profoundly defeated rebel operating on a temporary leash.
Wow.
The texts insist that if the believer leans on, depends on, trusts in, and places their faith entirely in the God of all creation, Jesus Christ, acknowledged here as Lord and Savior, their eternal outcome, their soul, is completely unassailably secure. The framework argues that while the war undeniably rages around the believer, and while they must engage in the daily fight utilizing the armor, the ultimate deciding victory was already decisively accomplished at the crucifixion and resurrection. For the believer, they are not fighting for victory. They're fighting from a position of already secured victory.
It's the difference between fighting in a war where the outcome is unknown versus being part of the mop-up crew.
Mop-up crew, I like that.
Right. The D-Day invasion already happened, the beach was taken, the war is fundamentally won, but there are still intense, dangerous skirmishes happening as we clear out the remaining occupied territory. You still have to wear your helmet, but you know exactly how the history book ends.
That is the exact theological posture the framework demands. Intense vigilance combined with absolute unshakable peace.
Amazing. Before we officially wrap up, I want to leave you with a final, slightly mind-bending thought drawn from the margins of these ancient texts.
Okay, let's hear it.
Something to chew on while you're driving to work or staring out the window? Think about how the biblical texts constantly, uniformly describe angels, these terrifying spiritual combatants, as having wings.
Yes, wings.
We mentioned the cherubim earlier. You have seraphim with 6 wings, creatures with 4 wings.
It is the most universally recognized imagery associated with the spiritual realm.
Right, but consider the context of the authors. What if those aren't literal bird feathers? We are talking about non-corporeal, multidimensional, incredibly complex spiritual beings? What if the ancient prophets, when their eyes were briefly opened to see a vision of this hidden reality, simply lacked the vocabulary for advanced physics, string theory, and quantum mechanics?
That makes a lot of sense.
What if what they described as wings are actually ancient human attempts to describe dimensional apertures?
Dimensional apertures.
Yeah.
Now, that is a paradigm-shifting concept.
It makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Spiritual biological mechanisms that allow these entities to instantly fold space, manipulating physics to move seamlessly between the spiritual dimension and the physical terrestrial realm.
Wow.
And if we accept that premise, it implies something massive about the geography of this war. It implies that a heavenly realm where this cosmic conflict is being fought is not billions of light years up there in the deep vacuum of outer space.
No.
It implies that the spiritual realm is a dimension overlaid directly on top of our own physical reality. It is intersecting with us, right here, right now, in the exact room you're sitting in as you listen to this.
Which means the closed terrarium of human history isn't just shattered. It never existed in the first place. The reality we navigate every day is infinitely more profound, complex, and populated than our physical senses can detect.
The invisible war is the truest thing happening in the world today. Keep questioning the narratives around you. Keep exploring the depths of these texts. And above all, keep your armor on and your mind guarded. Thank you for joining us for this massive deep dive into the cosmic conflict. We'll catch you on the next one.